There is a very hard truth to accept. When you love someone with avoidant tendencies, the thing that hurts you most is often not their silence, but your hope that this time they will be different. You watch them come close, open up just enough for you to believe this relationship might finally go somewhere. And then the moment things begin to deepen, they pull back, grow cold, disappear, or leave you alone with hundreds of unanswered questions. And the cruelest part of this attachment pattern is that it makes the person left behind believe that if they could just understand a little more, be softer a little more, be patient a little more, then maybe the other person would stop running. But from the perspective of avoidant psychology, the issue has never been that simple. An avoidant person does not withdraw from intimacy merely because they do not feel. Very often, they withdraw because the feelings have reached a place that is too deep, where closeness is no longer experienced as love alone, but begins to be interpreted by the nervous system as danger, the danger of losing freedom, the danger of being controlled, the danger of being forced to face the most vulnerable parts of themselves. That is why the more you try to pull them closer with love, the more they may retreat through self-protection. In this video, I want to explore with you a question that so many people have desperately tried to answer: what actually makes an avoidant person change? Can they really become different? And if they can, does that change come from your love, or from a deeper wake-up call within their own life? If you have ever loved someone who was hot and cold, if you have ever felt exhausted trying to understand a person who keeps withdrawing from connection, stay with me until the end of this video. And if you want to keep exploring the hidden psychological mechanisms behind avoidant attachment while also learning how to love from a more grounded and secure place, subscribe to the channel now and follow this journey with me. Loving someone with avoidant tendencies is one of those experiences that exhausts you in a very quiet way. It does not always hurt because of dramatic fights, and it does not always end with a clear breakup. What makes it so draining is the inconsistency and unpredictability. There are days when they feel very close to you. They text constantly, make plans, check in more often, and make you feel as if the relationship is finally moving forward. You begin to relax, begin to trust, begin to let yourself hope. You think maybe this time is different. Maybe they are opening up more. Maybe all of your patience and understanding is finally being met. But then, almost without warning, they change again. They grow quieter. Their replies get shorter. They pull away from the warmth that once felt real. And sometimes they disappear completely for days, as if that closeness never happened at all. Some say they need space. Some say nothing. Some leave you standing in the middle of a relationship where every signal is so unclear that you no longer know whether you are still being loved or simply being kept there by fragments of hope. And it is this constant cycle of closeness and distance, opening and shutting down, that pulls the other person into a deeply painful psychological loop. You begin blaming yourself. You ask whether you texted too much, expected too much, or accidentally pressured them somewhere along the way. You replay every sentence, every message, every moment their tone shifted, just trying to find a reasonable explanation for something that, in truth, was never clearly explained to you. And from there, you begin searching for the right formula that might make them stay. You start thinking that if only you spoke more gently, understood them better, became less emotional, less demanding, selfish, easier, then maybe they would stop running. But this is exactly where so many people begin losing themselves. Because in trying to become the right version for the other person to stay, you slowly stop living honestly with your own emotions and needs. You begin accepting ambiguity as something normal. You begin calling inconsistency, they are just scared. Calling withdrawal, they just need time. and calling your own pain, "I just need to be more patient." But the truth is, the problem is not that you have not loved enough. The problem is that avoidant people do not change simply because they are loved. Your love may be sincere, deep, and enduring, but it still cannot do the inner work that only they can do for themselves, and that is painful. But it is also one of the most liberating truths you can see when you begin understanding the real nature of this kind of relationship. To understand why an avoidant person can make you feel loved and abandoned within the same relationship, we need to look at their psychological foundation rather than only at their visible behavior. Avoidant attachment often feels like living with one foot inside the relationship while the other foot is always pointed toward the door. That does not mean they have no feelings, and it does not mean they do not need love. In fact, many avoidant people still deeply long for connection. They still enjoy feeling understood, cared for, and close to someone special. But the problem is that once that connection begins to grow deeper, steadier, and more serious, their nervous system may stop interpreting it as safety. Instead, it may begin to register it as threat. They fear deep intimacy because real intimacy requires openness, vulnerability, and emotional presence. They fear dependence because dependence makes them feel as though they are losing internal control. And even more deeply, they fear the feeling of being trapped, as though the more important a relationship becomes, the more likely it is to consume the inner space they rely on to protect themselves. That is why, in the early stages of a relationship, when everything still feels light, exciting, and not yet tied to deeper layers of attachment, an avoidant person can seem incredibly magnetic. They are present, attractive, sometimes even intensely warm. But when the relationship begins to raise more real questions about stability, commitment, the future, or emotional needs, their defenses start to wake up. And instead of saying directly, "I'm scared," "I feel overwhelmed," or "I don't know how to stay in this level of closeness," they often react by pulling away. Some become colder. Some take longer to respond. Some hide behind busyness. Some push you away through vagueness. What hurts their partner the most is seeing that shift happen without understanding what is truly taking place underneath. And this is also where many people make a painful mistake. They believe that if they just love harder, wait longer, sacrifice more, or become gentler, they will be able to heal the other person. They believe that if they are secure enough, patient enough, forgiving enough, the avoidant person will eventually learn how to stay. But the truth is, you cannot love an avoidant person into becoming secure. You cannot do for them the inner work of facing their fear of intimacy, their core beliefs about love, or the protective patterns that have become wired into their nervous system. And most dangerously, in trying to save them, you may begin to betray yourself, staying quiet when you need clarity, making yourself smaller when you need to be seen, accepting ambiguity when you deserve certainty. That is not healing. That is abandoning yourself in order to remain inside a relationship that still does not know how to remain with you. The first story is about a type of person that may feel painfully familiar if you have ever loved someone avoidant, a man who lived off the feeling of being desired. He was charming, knew exactly how to make people feel special, and almost always had someone waiting in the background to receive him whenever he returned. He was used to being forgiven after moments of inconsistency, used to people patiently waiting for him to become stable, used to the fact that as long as he came back at the right time, he could still be welcomed as if he had never hurt anyone. Within that pattern, he had no real reason to grow up. Because his old behaviors kept rewarding him, he still had attention, still had options, still had affection, without ever having to truly show up or take responsibility for the emotional impact he created. And that is exactly why so many avoidant people remain trapped in their old version for so long. When a pattern is still working, people rarely feel the need to change. But the turning point came when he met a woman who was completely different from what he had always known. She did not chase him. She was not dazzled by his outer charm. And she did not treat his emotional inconsistency as some mysterious thing worth patiently decoding. She saw him clearly, both his magnetism and his lack of consistency. And most importantly, she refused to participate in those emotional games. When he pulled close and then pushed away, she did not rush in to fill the distance. When he tested her through ambiguity, she responded with clear boundaries. When he behaved as if he could always come back whenever he wanted, she showed him that not everyone would still be there waiting. And for the first time in his life, he faced a radically different experience. Charm was no longer enough to keep someone. Delay was no longer rewarded. And the sense of power he once felt in the push-pull dynamic suddenly disappeared. Psychologically, this is an extremely important moment. Because when old behaviors stop working, the avoidant person is forced to touch the very question they have spent so long avoiding: if I can no longer live through this old pattern, then who am I? And am I willing to grow up for the first time? He could not rely only on attraction or the ability to return at the perfect moment. He had to prove seriousness. He had to learn how to be present, consistent, and responsible if he did not want to lose that woman. In other words, he did not change because he was loved unconditionally. He changed because, for the first time, love came with standards, with boundaries, with a mirror that no longer reflected back the easy version of himself he had always depended on. This reveals a very important truth. Avoidant people do not grow inside environments that endlessly tolerate them. They usually change only when the old game stops rewarding them. When inconsistency is no longer renamed as confusion, when withdrawal is no longer rescued by someone else's limitless patience, when they are truly at risk of losing something valuable, that is when growth finally has a chance to begin. And in this story, the change went even deeper when he became a father. Because becoming a father is not just about keeping a woman, it is about stepping into a role that cannot be lived halfway. It forces him to be truly present, to become more stable, to love through actions and not just passing emotion. From being someone who was merely desired, he learned how to become someone who could be trusted. From living off attention, he learned how to build a home. But not everyone changes in time. Some people only awaken after they have lost what mattered most. The second story is more painful, because this is the kind of change that only comes after someone has truly lost the most precious thing in their emotional life. It is the story of a man who always lived halfway in love. He could come very close for a while, making the other person believe that this time it was real. But the moment the relationship began to reach any real depth, he would pull back, sabotage it, play push-pull games, and behave as though the other person would always be there waiting for him to finally get it together. Then he met a woman who genuinely loved him. She did not just love his surface, she also saw the vulnerable parts hidden behind all of his inconsistency. But because he did not believe he was worthy of real love, he repeated the same old pattern, minimizing her feelings, testing her limits, hurting her, and assuming he would still have a chance to come back later. And this time, the thing he never expected happened. She really left. At first, like many avoidant people, he experienced the breakup as relief. No more pressure, no more expectations, no more having to face what he was not ready for. But as time passed, the emptiness began to take shape. He realized that what he had lost was not just a relationship, but a sincere kind of love that he might never easily find again. That regret became the strongest wake-up call of his life, not because the woman left in order to fix him, but because that loss forced him, for the first time, to look honestly at himself. The painful part is that by the time he truly changed, there was no longer a way back. The woman had moved on, and this time, she chose someone who knew how to love her properly. This story reminds us that some people only learn the value of love after they have already lost it. And sometimes, the lesson comes too late to save the old relationship. But there are also people who do not change because they lose someone. They change because eventually their own body and mind can no longer bear the weight of avoidance. The third story does not begin with a breakup, nor does it begin with someone leaving her. It begins from within, from a kind of exhaustion that people on the outside could hardly see. She was a deeply avoidant woman. She always joked about love, treated intimacy as something overly serious and almost ridiculous. Whenever someone got truly close, she immediately became uncomfortable and found a way to pull back. If a relationship stayed light, she could be magnetic, fun, and beautifully free. But the moment someone tried to step deeper into her emotional world, she ran. On the outside, she looked strong, composed, and detached, as if no one could ever really hurt her. But the truth was that inside her, guilt over the people she had hurt, and shame over the fact that she had never truly known how to stay in love. Then one day, her body began speaking for the emotions she had silenced for years. She could not sleep. She developed severe anxiety, and she began having panic attacks so intense she felt as though she could not breathe. Her body was sending alarm signals, as if telling her that she could no longer keep living by running from herself. And that was the real turning point. Psychologically, avoided emotions do not disappear. They simply move from the mind into the body, where they accumulate until the system can no longer handle them. When someone has been running for too long, the body itself forces them to stop. She started therapy. She began learning how to feel instead of numbing herself. She began facing the guilt, shame, and grief she had spent years denying behind a mask of false lightness. She did not change because someone held on to her. And she did not change because she lost one specific person. She changed because, in the end, the pain of continuing to run became greater than the fear of staying with her real feelings. And that is a profound truth. Not every wake-up call comes through love. Sometimes, it comes through the inner collapse that a person can no longer avoid. When you place these three stories side by side, one truth becomes very clear on the surface. Each avoidant person's path to change may look different, but underneath, they all follow the same psychological law. One person changed because they met someone with strong boundaries, someone who refused to play the push-pull game and no longer fed the old pattern. Another changed because they lost a real love, and that loss became a form of regret they could never fully escape. The third changed because their own body and inner world finally collapsed under the weight of emotions that had been repressed for too long. 3 different paths. 3 different wake-up calls. Yet all of them meet at the same point. They did not change because they were loved enough. They did not change because someone sacrificed deeply enough, waited long enough, or tolerated enough inconsistency, ambiguity, and emotional withdrawal. And they also did not change because someone said the perfect thing, sent the perfect message, or acted skillfully enough to suddenly make them grow up. This is the painful truth many people need to understand. Real change in an avoidant person is not born from someone else's effort to save them. It only happens when something greater than their fear of intimacy forces them to face themselves. That something may be the risk of losing a person they cannot easily replace. It may be the impact of meeting a boundary strong enough to end the old game. It may also be emotional exhaustion, anxiety, panic, or emptiness so overwhelming that they can no longer keep running. In other words, avoidant people begin to change only when the cost of continuing to escape becomes greater than the cost of staying with the truth inside themselves. And this is the most important message for you to carry forward. You are not the deciding factor in that transformation. You may love them, understand them, and have compassion for their wounds. But you cannot create their awakening for them. The only thing you can do is stop feeding the pattern that keeps both of you stuck, and return to protecting your own worth, your own boundaries, and your own clarity. This is probably the hardest truth to hear, but also the most necessary truth. If you are loving or have loved an avoidant person, you are not their wake-up call. You are not their therapist. And you are not the one responsible for saving them from the defensive patterns they themselves are not yet ready to face. I know this is painful, because when you love someone who keeps moving hot and cold, the most vulnerable part of you wants to believe that if you are patient enough, forgiving enough, understanding enough, loving enough, then one day they will finally see your value and change. But avoidant psychology does not work that way. Their healing is their responsibility. Whether they are willing to look at their fear of intimacy, their deep beliefs about love, and the withdrawal patterns wired into their nervous system is a journey no one else can walk for them. And what is even more painful is this: the more you chase, the more you rescue, the more you offer unconditional tolerance, the more you unintentionally prolong their avoidant pattern. Because when a person can remain inconsistent without losing anything, can pull away and come back while always finding the door open, can hurt you and then be forgiven through a few vague signals, they have very little reason to truly change. That is why this sentence matters so much. The more easily you forgive their inconsistency, the fewer reasons they have to change. That does not mean you must become bitter, cold, or unloving. It simply means you must stop turning love into a place where they can hide without growing. Emotionally mature people do not use sacrifice to buy vague hope. They do not call endurance love, and they do not call self-abandonment loyalty. They understand that having compassion for someone's wounds does not mean allowing those wounds to keep bleeding into their life. And that is where you have to return to reality if they want to heal. They must choose that journey themselves. Your role is not to save them. Your role is to stop losing yourself while waiting for them to wake up. If you've stayed with me until this point, I want you to hold on to one very important truth. Avoidant people can change, but that change does not begin because you love them harder. It begins when they can no longer keep running from themselves. And that is exactly why you need to stop building your life around a question that was never yours to answer. When will they finally change? The real question is, how much more of myself am I willing to lose before I choose myself again? Because loving an avoidant person for too long can train you to wait, to live in ambiguity, and to keep explaining away the empty spaces they leave behind. But healthy love does not ask you to live in waiting mode. Healthy love does not make you constantly question your worth simply because the other person is not yet capable of showing up. If today you realize that you have tried for too long, forgiven too much, and kept hoping for a version of them that they themselves have not chosen to become, then please do not use that realization to blame yourself. Use it as your own wake-up call. You do not have to save them to prove that your heart is deep enough. You do not have to remain inside a relationship that exhausts you just to prove that you know how to love. Sometimes, emotional maturity is not about being able to keep someone. It is about being wise enough not to keep losing yourself while trying to hold on to someone who is not ready to stay. And that is what secure love looks like, not chasing ambiguity, not begging for clarity, and not using pain as proof of sincere love. If this video spoke to you, subscribe to the channel and stay with me for the next ones. Here, we are not only talking about avoidant people, but also about how you can become steadier, understand yourself more deeply, and learn how to love without betraying yourself. Remember, your job is not to save someone who is running from themselves. Your job is to come back and protect your own heart, your boundaries, and your worth.